call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order. So on the agenda today, a few housekeeping issues here to get into, and then we can spend a little time with the report and decide if we have any other issues. The first one was a technical issue from the last discussion, was the vote on the tax cut piece. Alderman Payon, would you like to be recognized?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I would ask that we reconsider the vote on the mayor's half-a-cent cut in the property tax rate. I thought we were voting on something else. I made a mistake. I misunderstood what it was that we were voting on, simply put, and would like to have that matter reconsidered.
Okay. Do we have a motion on?
Second.
Well, I would make the motion.
So it moved and seconded to reconsider the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then do we have a motion on the underlying issue?
Well, I mean, it's a two-parter. So one part was funding for new staff, and the second part was how to pay for it. So I would ask the alderman.
I think the way, technically, the way the votes came, we voted on them as separate items. But
I understand,
yeah,
but
sure.
what I understand Alderman Payon wants to do is to reconsider funding the additional positions by not recognizing the mayor's half-cent.
That was the only issue that we were voting on. That was my understanding in reviewing the matter.
Well, but it has impacts, and the impacts are, if you don't do that, how do you fund the new positions?
Well, I don't really anticipate the overall outcome to be any different from what it was previously. I just wanted to change my vote, to be honest about it.
Well, okay, but I'd still like to explore your thinking. Right. I mean, are you then therefore not in favor of the additional staff positions?
I already voted on that. The only one I was in favor of was the auditor.
Okay. How would you pay for the auditor?
I will be examining, I have examined and will continue to examine other possibilities and avenues for coming up with the $100,000 or so that we think we need.
All right. I have no further questions or dialogue. Is there cross-examination?
I think the cross-examination is over.
Well, can I cross-examine myself?
So, Alderman Arnett, we would need a motion to...
I move that we use the money from the mayor's staff cut to pay for additional staff.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, now on to the next thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. So we were talking about, we were getting into a little bit of a discussion here as a sidebar before we get the report about the WIP and the CIP, and do you want to
Yes.
sort of talk about that a little bit and see where that goes? Go ahead, Alderman Arnett.
So, Alderman Budge at the last meeting brought up a couple of issues. One was before we start funding the watershed improvement plan, we might want to accept the watershed improvement plan, and I concur, and I discussed it at lunch with some of my colleagues, and we think that a resolution from the Office of Law would be appropriate, and the resolution would be for the council to accept the watershed improvement plan. At that time, there could be debate about the watershed improvement plan, but it is a plan for us to meet our total minimum daily load over a 9-year period. So that would take care of one of the issues. The second issue is if, in fact, we're going to start funding for the watershed improvement plan, which apparently we are in part in the CIP. I was under a misunderstanding. We need to include that in the CIP in its totality, and then one part would be $1 million. Is that correct, Melissa, that we are already funding $1 million in the CIP for the watershed improvement plan? I want to see Melissa shake her head. Only, yeah. Okay, so then the other $25 million, if we fund it through an increase in fees, would need to go into, that's what I asked you for, by the way, would need to go into the CIP for at least 5 years, and the funding would be in other, at this point, funded by fees.
There's currently $10 million in the plan for the City Harbor flood mitigation. That does not include the $1 million
No,
that we
this
received.
isn't flood mitigation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is the watershed improvement, the 16 stormwater, 16-part plan for meeting our
Right.
TMDLs by 2025.
Okay, I apologize. There's $1 million in FY18, which is going to be bond funded.
Which
This
line
is
number?
line 43. It's in the stormwater fund.
Okay,
I have the different
all right.
spreadsheet.
And that is specifically for the WIP.
Yes.
Right, all right,
And then there's $5 million in the out year, so it's proposed to be funded $1 million annually.
right. But we know that that is not nearly enough to finance the WIP. And also, how does that reflect the current $850,000 we get in stormwater fees? Is that not to be used for the WIP?
It's not being proposed to be used currently, no.
So the WIP proposes an average of $2.5 million a year. So we're knowingly stinting on, or that part would be from bonds. So the $1.5 additional million would have to be made up for by increasing the stormwater fee.
Or proposed,
We didn't have the WIP's breakdown of funding when the CIP was put together.
I think we did.
We were given the WIP's funding on April 24th.
Is that when Maria presented it? Okay. All right. Well, so now we do have it.
Yeah, now we
Right.
have it. We
Right.
did.
So we, unless we're going to choose to ignore it or to kick it down the road, it would seem to me that we need to,
Can I just ask a question? So in looking at this, in the CIP, we see the $1 million, the bond funding, which is new this year to do
Right.
these kind of projects that are spelled out in the WIP. The $800,000 some odd dollars that
$850,
come
right.
from the current fee,
right, should also,
where are those reflected?
well, that's a good question.
they're reflected in the operating budget, in the
Gotcha. So it
stormwater
doesn't
fund.
show up
It does
even though
not
they're-
Well,
reflect the
shouldn't it show
CIP.
up as other then?
It's not currently being proposed as a funding source
Yeah.
for this project. This also does not include any of grants that the Office of Environmental Policy is applying for
Well,
this
nor-
project.
Nor should it until they get it.
Well,
But just to bring this back around to what Alderman Arnett was saying, so that $800,000 is probably likely being spent in the way it traditionally has, which is people going to do the clean out of
Routine
projects and doing
maintenance.
small-scale maintenance.
Right.
But
Right.
what is new this year is $1 million on top of that.
Right. So that is actually good news, because if we're going to fully finance the WIP, we would only have to increase stormwater fees, probably a little more than doubling them, in order to finance the fee portion of the $2.5 million a year.
Mr. City Manager, I know the City Manager wanted to jump in on it.
As I recall, the watershed improvement plan, the estimate, the estimate was roughly around $10 million to complete the watershed improvement plan. That may be several million one way or the other,
25 million.
but even if it were 25 million, the strategy here in the first year was to appropriate $1 million so we get started. Remember, there are grants out there, there are public-private partnerships out there. We want to gauge exactly what that is initially before we would look to do a rate study, determine what kind of rate increase might be required to continue the funding the program. I think that was the strategy. Let's crawl before we walk. Let's take that $1 million, let's start the projects, let's see what's out there. Federal rules may change, state rules may change, we don't know. But we know there's additional dollars out there, because we've had experience with this over the last several years. And what we've accomplished so far has been largely as a result of our partnership with the watershed improvement groups that have gotten grants to do these improvements. So that's out there. So my point I was trying to make the last time we met was, let's get a year under our belt and then make a determination, do the rate study, and see if we have to look at an increase sometime in the future.
I have a difficulty with that in a couple of ways. One, when you kick the can down the road like that, and if the nut stays at $25 million, which I added up the 9 years, and it's $25 million, now you have to increase fees even more to cover it. Now, I accept, as certainly, hopefully, a probability, we'll get some kind of grant money. But I find it hard to believe or accept that we are going to have to increase the fees to help us get some of these funds. So then the question becomes, if you accept my logic so far, how much should we change the fees? Now, I'm willing to accept a number of premises, including 2 of Joe's. We haven't accepted the WIP, and I'm hopeful that we also will be able to find some grant money, but I think that it's important to make some changes in the fee schedule now. I can't believe that the studies are going to come back and say, no, it's not 25 million, it's 6 million, or some number like what we seem to have in the CIP. So it seems like some money should go into the other category, which is where I think fees would show up and where grants would show up, to close the gap.
Alderman, I don't disagree, but my only point is we have no basis right now to increase the fee. We have no experience right now to lay a rationale for the fee increase. I don't doubt that in the future we're going to need one. I think that's all jurisdictions going through this drill right now have come to that conclusion. But we have no rational basis at this moment as to how much that increase should be over what period of time.
Bruce, did you want to weigh in on this before? I know you were recognized.
No, I actually, city manager.
Got covered?
Covered.
Well, so I look to all colleagues here from the council. I've certainly established my position. I'm not a glutton for punishment, and I recognize that it's an election year, so I certainly don't want to increase the fees any more than we have to. And I have received discussion from some people who have concern, since this is a use fee rather than a property tax fee, it is regressive rather than progressive, so there are portions of the population where any fee increase is going to be hard to manage. So with that input, I'm certainly loath to do anything to the fees that's going to be a big new imposition, but I still remain convinced that we should be doing something with the fees. I cannot believe that the $1 million study is going to come back and say, the bay cleaned itself up. We're off the hook.
Alderman Finlayson?
Speaking as a member of LGAG, the cost for bay cleanup is not going to go away. The EPA may go away, but the expectation to clean up the bay in some form or fashion is going to be with us forever. We know that the costs will not go down. I think Maria Broadbent should probably be here, and maybe you all had this discussion about whether she's attached dollars to her plan projects currently. Do we know, and did you all discuss this already, about how much she has projected the cost will be for the coming year, and how many years out is she planning?
My understanding is that she accepts the WIP, and page 3-3 has a table that shows year-by-year spending for the 16 different projects, which average around $2.5 million and total a little over $25 million. Now, that she's accepted doesn't mean that we've accepted it,
Mhm.
and I think we need to do that. But, and I would be pleased if we get grants to cover that, and if we want to use some bonds to cover that, that's also great. But I stand fast that I don't think we're going to cover it without a change in the fees.
Well, as part of the WIP, we have to be able to show our plan for funding of
Mhm.
these projects.
Right.
And to kick the can down the road, as you say, is not a plan. I mean, I guess it is a plan. It's
a
not a very
typical plan.
prudent plan in my mind. So maybe we don't take the big step that Alderman Arnett is proposing, but there must be some steps in between nothing and something 3 times as much. Show that we're going to escalate it. And I know I said this at the last meeting, to do something more incrementally than what we're hearing. And as I said at the last meeting, have we built in the costs for maintenance of these projects that are in existence or will be completed? Because while we have all these very well-intended community groups doing all of this in our community, they are not including in their funding maintaining any of these projects. And all of that will fall to the city. So that's an additional expense on top of what the WIP is going to cost us. So, keep that in mind. And for us to count on grant funding, I mean, what's the problem with us putting the funding there? And if grants come in the interim, then so be it. But the cost is not going to go down. It's only going to go up.
That's a good point. I mean, I think, as we were just saying, that, while the $1 million is new projects, the current fee is basically going into supporting the existing projects and going back and cleaning them. And as you add more projects, the maintenance piece is going to go up over time. So
Right.
it's going to eat up a bigger share of whether it's double or triple, whatever it is now. So that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, my sense was that, yeah, it was sort of a back of the envelope equation to get to the AAA. And now that we have a little more clarity about the million, I think, it probably would be smart to pull that down a little bit. I just think sort of making the policy statement is almost as important as the dollars, to say, we realize this issue is not going away. It is, in fact, growing, and we are adding more dollars to front-load this process, and hopefully the future councils will continue to do that. So, I mean, if you'd like to move off the 3 times to 2 times or something, I think that would probably make some sense. It's just a question of what your intent is.
So, I guess, instead of 3 times, in not having this be a huge jump, and with the hope that there might be some other sources of money from grants, maybe we raise it, like right now it's $10.22 a quarter, maybe we raise that by 50% and make it $15.33 and go through the whole schedule. There's 4 different fees to a similar amount and then, as the city manager says, and I accept his wisdom, we get into this more deeply and we find out how accurate the WIP assessment is, then we would have a better sense of what the total budget is. So I can't do the math quickly in my head, but tripling it was changing the fee to $30 a month. Increasing it by 50% would make it $15 a month. And then how that would carry through the 4 fees.
So, in looking at the last page of the packet is the proposed
good.
Finance Committee amendments to the, you can see amendment number 2 shows the stormwater utility fees as current that are striked out to put your new dollar amounts in. You could probably rough out some numbers there that would allow if we approve it, Melissa to add those in,
Which page?
the last page of the packet.
Very last.
City manager?
Mr. Chairman, would that, maybe the maker of the motion, of what will be the, who will be the maker of the motion, would this be in lieu of the 2% increase that is already
Yeah,
recommended, in
Yeah.
addition to or in lieu of?
lieu of, lieu of. So that would probably require some other code changes, but so like, the $30 would become 15. And similar increases, and I can't do the math right now, but we can do the math. And I guess I would then turn to Alderman Budge and say, does that seem more in keeping with your thinking? No.
My thinking is was trying to add up some numbers over here. What
Oh,
would you,
well, so what I'm proposing is instead of tripling, is a much more modest increase. So instead of going from $10.22 to $30, we would go from $10.22 to $15, rounded off. No, I know it is 33, but I'm just saying 15,
So
and then
basically
we
a
would do the same
Roughly a
kind of-
50% increase in any line, not
Right.
a triple.
Yeah. Not tripling.
yeah, and
50%.
that buys us some ability to do some pay-go funding on
Right.
the CIP projects.
Right.
Not all of them probably,
Okay.
but on the CIP stormwater projects.
Right.
So the understanding would be the proceeds from the additional 50% would be earmarked for the watershed improvement plan project?
Yeah.
Not to go into the operating budget as part of public works maintenance?
Well, the operating budget's
Which is
already
where it
taken
goes
care
now.
of. Right? Because it's already paying for that, so the additional fees would be going to projects, yes.
So that has to, I think that needs to be explicit in the motion or the committee report or. Either way, so.
I understand, yeah. I would just specify that the additional funds captured by this rate increase would fall to fund balance to be appropriated for the WIP or designated for that purpose.
Okay,
And I have the rates if you want.
okay.
$15, $60, $120, and $195.
If,
So the rates would become from
The-
$10.20 to $15, from $39.02 to $60, and from $115 to $120, and finally,
that doesn't seem right.
No. Stormwater rate, currently 10.22, would strike that to $15.
yeah,
Right,
Strike 39.02 to $60
yeah.
65?
And then from 78
to
03
120.
to 120, and then
then
finally from 130.05 to 190.
Correct.
Okay, so that's
I think I did that one.
the body of
Pretty close to that.
yeah.
the amendments.
Right.
And then we also have to strike in the legislation the 2% per annum increase in the stormwater fee that was last year or the year before. Or, otherwise, that would be in addition to this.
Right.
All right.
Isn't it, not to get in the weeds, but wasn't, the 2%'s not mandatory, it's the discretion of the administration, isn't it?
That's
To go up to 2% without council approval.
That's right.
So, as long as we don't do it, it doesn't matter.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
The less we have to do, the better.
So,
Or in lieu of the 2%.
yeah,
But then these fees also have to be reflected in the CIP in the other category, right? Because it's a source of revenue for a capital project, which is the other
No.
point that Joe made.
The concept right now is because the WIP program has not been adopted, and there really are no projects outlined for it, that the additional fees will fall to fund balance and be restricted to some future WIP program.
So, but wait, there's $1 million in the CIP for stormwater projects.
Right.
Are those are just as undefined as the WIP, right?
Correct. Okay.
So what I'm trying to get to is that the extra funds that we raise get used towards those CIP projects, whatever they end up being, rather than financing them that $1 million 100% through bond funding, which is what's currently in the CIP.
Oh, you went to do PAYGO. Is that what I'm understanding? You went.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Does that make sense, or is
No,
that...
I get it now.
It should only, I mean, based on the current assessments, if you raise them 50%, it should throw off somewhere around $400,000.
Or do we borrow on the 300, or do we use the 300-400 just on debt service and then?
Well, okay, so then we go back to my increases, but take out the $1 million bonds.
Sure. Melissa?
The reality is, the borrowing that's currently being proposed is for $1 million in FY18. By the time this fee increase goes into effect, we're not really going to see those proceeds until June 2019,
At the end of
at the end of the year, because there will be an increase in FY18. This $1 million to start this project off for the MS4 compliance will happen in the fall of this year, if you see what I'm saying. And then the plan can be amended to formally adopt the WIP program, I guess, where the operating funds can be put into place as a funding source. Does that make sense?
Yep. Sort of.
No, I was gonna say it doesn't to me. I would almost
She's saying,
think, following your logic, Joe, we should not show the $1 million in the out years if we're gonna fund it. If you wanna go PAYGO and we're funding it all by fees,
Well, but that gets to, if we're funding it by PAYGO, then we're looking at the triple, if we're funding it by debt service, then we end up with a lower fee for a longer period of time.
The debt service funding is only for FY18. The out years do not specify the funding source.
okay. All right,
so it's a conversation for whoever's on the finance committee next year to see how much, assuming we do this,
we're making you come back.
50%, the 50%, yeah,
You might not be on the council, but you're gonna chair the finance.
the 50% rolls up to and how much it does.
All right, so.
So we have an amendment
Amendment
by
to-
Alderman Arnett.
Right, Amendment 2 is being amended on the last page to leave the strikeouts in, but then change each of these new dollar amounts from 30 to 15, from
115, 60.
115 to 60, and 235 to 120, and 390 to 190,
Is there a second?
195.
Any other questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, so we have that cleared up. Other issues with anything in the recommendations, or anyone want to revisit anything in the list of amendments that you'll see in the report here? In looking at it, obviously the first thing is a summary of the meetings. The executive summary talks about the overall health of the city and some of the larger issues in the budget. Obviously,
Yes.
that's all the hearing. Sure, Alderman Finlayson.
As you should probably all be able to guess, my question has to do with community grants. At the last meeting, we heard that the mayor had made some changes to his community grant amounts, additional requests. And what went off in my head was because of the Kunta Kinte Alex Haley Monument.
What page are you on, please?
I'm on D1 and 2. And on D2, the amount in this document is $2,200. And there's supposed to be a $7,500 amount in the operating budget. And somebody, maybe it was Nikki, who said that the mayor was submitting amendments to increase those numbers.
I thought what I heard her say was that in the mayor's submission from last year's numbers, there was two changes to the grant program. One was adding $1,000 to the Art and Public Places, and one was adding some money to
$300
that.
to Kunta Kinte, maybe?
Exactly. So if we look at it, it should look different from FY18 requested from FY17 adopted.
So where does that appear? And is it in something the finance committee will approve and make part of your report?
Okay, on page D2,
D?
D2,
D as in David, too?
correct.
Yeah, there it is. So in the category 2, the Kunta Kinte Alex Haley, it shows that the FY18 proposed allocations was $2,200, and the mayor's budget has it at $3,000. So he increased it. So the underlying, as presented to us, has that. And then if you look at,
I'm not seeing the same thing. Maybe
I
mine is
see
different.
$2,200.
It says $2,200 for the proposed allocation, Calvin.
right,
Yeah, it went up from 2,000 to 2,200, and the money is still in the operating budget. And the other increase, there's
Art and Public Places.
Art and Public Places
Mhm.
and Maryland Hall,
And Maryland Hall, okay.
for a total of 3,000, 1,000 and 2,000.
that's what it is, the 20 to 25.
Right. And then $200 for the Kunta Kinte, but the remaining amount is still in the mayor's operating budget.
So what is this number that's in the grant document? Is that $2,400, $2,500, or $2,200?
22,
22.
22.
So the other additional funding that he's proposing will appear in the operating budget?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It's
so-
been that way for about 3 years now, where it's, one piece is in this category, and the other piece, the $6,500, is in the operating budget.
I understand that, but I'm talking about the additional funding that he is proposing for Arts and Public Places, Maryland Hall, and Kunta Kinte.
Oh, that is in the grants portion.
Okay, we're getting somewhere. Where does that show up now in the report?
Let me find that. So, where is it? Yes. Arts and Public Places, you see, went up from 14,300 to 15,300.
What page?
That's on top of page D2.
Oh, yeah.
And Maryland Hall, you'll see went up from 18,000 up to 20,000.
Okay. And Kunta Kinte?
And the Kunta Kinte is, right now it was 2,000, no, I'm sorry, 3,000 to 2,200.
Sure, Alderman Budge. Yeah, I mean,
So-
that's the issue, that it doesn't.
It
yeah.
doesn't
The
show
way it was
up.
explained.
So the mayor has a special projects budget that allegedly contains the funding for the bulk of the Kunta Kinte maintenance. The portion of code that I quoted over the weekend that I was told to stop reading specifies that the mayor's special projects budget will be itemized during the budget submission. and it's not. But there's only $6,500 in it.
In the mayor's budget, there is 70,400 in special projects. That's on page 14, row 994.
What page? 14. Of the pro forma, no. it's-
What line item?
the pro forma.
994.
Got it. Whoa.
So,
What page is that on? I'm sorry.
Page 14.
14 of the pro forma, the top
Mhm.
line, 994. So from last year's budget of $5,500 increase.
Okay, and the contribution, what, line item 996 is the community grants?
It's gotta be.
That's a question? Line 996
Yeah, that number matches.
is community grants?
Yes, the $3,000, the change, that $3,000 is $2,000 and the $1,000.
And what, say that again, please?
The increase from the $295,000 to $298,000
Mhm.
is equal to the Maryland Hall of $2,000 plus the $1,000 for the arts.
So where's the additional funding for the Kunta Kinte Memorial?
I had to review the special projects. There's a $6,000 increase in that. If you look at line 994, there's a $6,000, and I need to go back and take a look at what makes that number up.
So I guess
You see the number?
I do,
Okay.
64,4 to 74?
Yes, ma'am, yes.
so the question is, what is that $6,000, and is
Right.
that the increase in this particular project? I mean, we can get some explanation of
Yeah,
that.
I'm just gonna, I'll get that to you before tonight.
Okay.
I don't wanna say something that's not accurate. It's been a while since I looked at it.
We have committed over the years to be able to maintain the monument on city docks. It's gonna cost $10,000. So that's my goal, to
Okay.
make sure that funding is in place. And,
All right.
you know, whether it's two different places or one, doesn't matter.
You need $10,000.
Exactly. Now, more if you want to give it to 10,000. Thank you.
While you're at it, and not necessarily for tonight, but for our further council discussions of the budget, could you give us a breakdown of what's in special projects?
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay,
So I do have some
Sure.
questions about the report, starting with amendments 3 and 4 and 5. Those are unloaded salary amounts? In other words, they don't have benefits?
3, 4, and
That would
5.
be, yeah.
That's really two numbers. What I did, is that, last week, I said, the question is, what is a half a penny worth on the tax rate? And I
Gotcha.
said about $330,000. It's really $223,000. I mean, $323,900.
Say
So-
that number again?
$323,900.
Which amendment are we on?
Well, right now, he's talking about the amount of money yielded by the reduction in the tax rate. So it's $323 and $1,000 and $900.
$323,900.
Right.
323,900. All right, so what I then did, said, okay, the $323,900 needs to be equally distributed to each one of the proposals. the $100,000 for the auditor, the $100,000 for the budget analyst, $100,000 for the planner, and $1,000 for the attorney. So 80,975 makes that happen. 80,975 times 4 is equal to 323,900. So 24,292 is benefits and $56,000 is salary.
Okay.
So that's, now.
So I figured that's what it was,
Right.
but, and I can talk to two of these specifically. In discussing with the Director of Planning and Zoning, he needs 100,000 in order to give him flexibility to get the senior kind of person we need that can come right in and helping us with the next comp plan and to complete all the studies from the last comp plan. I think there's a similar notion for the amount for the finance budget analyst, that this needs to be a senior person. The notion is this is someone that can come in, start working on changes to the Excel spreadsheet to do things like getting into the balance sheet sort of analysis, but also to give us all the percent change and percent distribution detail that we need and so forth. So I thought that the difference was going to be, we're not going to be able to hire these people instantaneously. So I was happy to live within the constraints of funding this by not doing the decrease in the tax rate, but the levels that I had in my amendments were in the $100,000 range, which would be the fully loaded salaries. So if these are just the base salary, not with the loads, I can live with it. But if this is the cap, I don't think we're going to get, I mean, maybe we can within however we handle the auditor, maybe that's a contract that we have with a firm. Same thing with legal, maybe that's a contract we have with the law firm to be able to do on-demand kinds of things to help us. But the two explicit staffing persons, the budget analyst and the planner, senior planner, or however, planner level 2 is what I talked with Pete about. We need to give him the latitude to get somebody who can hit the ground running. So I can accept these amendments if they're not loaded for additional benefits, or I can accept them if we're planning on this being only part year, but we know
Part
that
year.
down the road, they're going to be more expensive people. I just,
The construct of this is partial year.
okay,
This is the amount of money that's available to be spent,
okay.
and
All
then,
right, I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that these are going to be probably more expensive people than $80,000 a year people.
But, I mean, realistically, you only need one of them to be, maybe it's the legal thing, or it's a part-time person or a contract person, and it makes the numbers work for
Right.
the other ones, even as fully loaded people.
So we're viewing these as a bundle.
Exactly, with that much
Just want
money.
to make sure.
I think that makes sense.
hold on.
Sure.
The devil's in the detail. The way I am envisioning presenting the revised budget per finance committee is to increase the finance department by $80,000, increase planning and zoning by $80,000 and $200,000, increase,
City manager.
Right, so they are going to be looked at individually
Yeah.
and not in aggregate.
Okay.
And then during the year, the city manager, after you approve the $50,000 transfer, again, because that has to be done each year, then we can move money from one category to the
50,000?
next,
I didn't think it was 50.
or whatever it is.
No, so.
Is that, if that's okay?
Yeah, no,
Okay,
Yeah,
that's what
yeah,
I meant.
I think we're all on the same page.
Exactly.
all right.
The next one, and Joe, I would look to you on this one, is amendment number 6. For the wayfinding, is that what we whittled that down to finally? I thought it was more than $47,000. I thought it was much bigger.
Yeah, so page 8 of the.
All right, where is
package
the, I
that
thought the total for the package was $615,000.
Page
Page 9.
These are all the operating budget amendments. and then
Amendment
CIP on
1
the next page.
is page 9 is, oh, I got you. So is that 47,000 in addition to the 615?
No. The 615 is in the CIP.
Right?
The 47 is in this year's budget.
Is debt service?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure we were getting the right numbers in there.
Alderman Pam?
This is slightly off subject, but it does have to do with the Wayfair signage. Does anybody know exactly how many signs we get for $615,000?
12 and a half.
Just seems like an excessive
It's
amount.
not just signs, by the way, it's real-time monitoring.
The, Dr. Nash's presentation to us at the last meeting, she said that the $330,000 that was left in her wayfinding program included 2 active signs. And that the quote that she got was about in excess of $100,000 per sign. So there's a school of thought that says the actual number may be lower, but we won't know until purchasing gets there. And since I don't think 2 signs is adequate, I have increased the amount from what Dr. Nash recommended.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other,
Yeah, what
sure,
is,
Alderman Kirby?
Yeah, thank you. And my question is just like Alderman Payon's, just about too. And I asked earlier at lunch, will the signs on the outer limits of Annapolis coming into Annapolis, are they gonna have the capacity to just tell somebody if there's a huge fire on West Street, do not use West Street, go elsewhere?
The wayfinding signs are the active messaging on the wayfinding signs as they're currently planned is to talk strictly about garage capacity. Pretty much like when you see when you go to the airport and it has a list of this garage, that garage, full, open, 5,000 spaces, 2 spaces, don't bother coming in. And that doesn't lend itself well to the kind of messaging you're talking about. That would be a different program.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other thoughts? Sure, Alderman Flake.
The 47,000, and maybe you just said this, I'm a little concerned that that becomes a transportation cost.
Yes, it becomes a parking cost, and the offset to it, in theory, is increased revenues in the garages because people can find them now.
So it's a parking, not a transit.
Yes.
Okay, that's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts on anything in the report that anyone would like to flag?
still trying to read it. I'm on R1717.
Okay.
Fee schedule was recommended as follows in addition to transportation fees for the circular, okay, that's because we're no longer charging. Got it. So the R1817 will reflect the reductions in the, that's fine scheduling, not fee scheduling. R1717 will reflect the changes that we just made for the stormwater. Okay? Well, first of all, at my first glance, I think this is a very good finance report that you pulled together. I was, okay, well, that Nikki did. I was impressed with what we did. No, I thought it was a very comprehensive report. I have
Sure.
not obviously digested it thoroughly, and will try to do so before tonight's council meeting. And then I would recommend, we talked about this at lunch with the mayor, Sheila and Kenny, it might be a good idea to have a couple of council work sessions where we sit collectively and discuss the budget as we move towards the final vote. They would have to be advertised, they would be public. Sheila, I want you to agree with me. I'm talking about having a couple of council-wide work sessions to go through hammering out the fund, because these are only recommendations, and there's only 2.5 votes for this, so we need 5 to pass this. Yes.
We do.
Yes. And we've amended some of it today, and I guess we probably ought to have a... Okay. All right, but, as I was saying, I think this report is very comprehensive and impressive, and thank you to everyone that helped put it together. I do need to read it and understand it more thoroughly, but I'm proud to present this to the rest of the council.
Okay.
But we have more amendments?
So I have on the legislation before the committee was going back to the classification and pay plan, right? Was that one of them that we have to approve it with? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. You want to take that one and we get that out of the way, or do you want? Whichever way you want to do it. We'll start right here. Okay. So when we talked last, you were saying that there might have been some other positions that have been added over the last budget year or changed in some way that needed to be reflected in this, or are you happy with where it's at?
Oh, there's new steps.
Yes. The police and the fire, and I believe ASME too. ASME effective 2019, but there were additional longevity steps added. So therefore, this pay scale needed to be adjusted to reflect those additional steps.
So in fire, this is a 17-year step and a 22-year step? And in police, it's a 17-year step?
The fire department is a 22-year step, and the police department is a 17-year step.
Okay.
That's on the front page.
Jason?
Sure.
With the highest, whether it's 22, I'm not sure what the other step was, that does mean that once employees get to that step, they are frozen for the duration, correct? Okay. Just want that to be clear. Thank you.
If there's no other questions about this, do we have a motion to accept?
I move we accept or recommend to the council acceptance of our 15-17, the COLA page, which represents the half-year COLA.
The whole thing.
And the new steps, right.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. What else you got, Mr. Miller?
All righty, if we can turn to page 9. There was lots of discussion, and I just want to make sure that we identify the funding for these capital improvement plans. We talked about Amendment 1, but we did not finalize Amendment 2, 3, and 4.
See you.
A question on amendment number 1 on page 9, and I'll defer to Alderwoman Finlayson, but shouldn't that be attorney to city council, not attorney for city council in terms of a title? first line
What page are we on?
on amendment number 1. Just a matter of form, should be attorney 2, not attorney 4.
So he's on R 1517, the position classifications.
It says attorney 4, city council. I'm saying, shouldn't it be attorney 2, city council? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Is that T-O or T-O-O?
Exactly.
I would like for us to make it clear that this is a multi-year project and the funds are restricted for this purpose alone.
You mean for Russell Street?
No.
Right.
Oh, Russell.
Okay.
Oh.
If I may.
Sure.
Each of these amendments for the capital improvement plan, 2, 3, and 4, we do not identify the source of funding. So I would like to finalize that, if you will. If I recall correctly, we identified the restricted funds and fund balance, the capital funds, as the targeted
$5
source of
million.
funds.
$5 million.
Right. I just want to make, we have to identify that. in
So
these
that would
amendments.
be other as opposed to bond issuance.
It needs to identify fund balance.
It has to have something attached to it,
Right.
which makes sense. But obviously, that can be revisited in the future, right? I mean,
Oh,
like,
definitely.
each year, depending where you're at in the phase of
Well-
a multi-year project, they gotta
To
take
Alderwoman
people
Lasson's point, I think once we, well, if we say that we're going to appropriate, for example, on Amendment 2, $940,000 for the Russell Street reconstruction, you have to come back to that specific amendment, if you will, and change the funding.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, it is
Yeah.
restricted. That $5 million is now $4,060,000, unless you change it. The same thing for
My point is, like,
Burgess.
even in this budget and other budgets we've seen where we take, prior year funds
Exactly.
that weren't allocated and we move them
That's right.
around, like, so there's
Exactly.
always some ability to do that.
That's right.
But yeah, you are basically saying of that 5 million, you're gonna spend a little under $1 million on this
That's right.
project. Good.
But I think we have to identify the source of funds as the fund balance for
I see Barbara, oh, here's Russell, 18, line 18.
So may I
Yeah.
ask, should the language be more specific in the amendment?
Yes, we,
Never a
Because it just
problem.
says general fund, but you want to say
and to appropriate
appropriated from,
$940,000 from restricted fund balance or capital, whatever the,
Right.
capital reserve fund.
And that'll show in the other column N
Yes, that's correct.
for both Russell Street and Barbara,
Russell Street and Maynard Burgess also.
and Maynard Burgess.
So we have to have the same language for Maynard Burgess and Barbud.
Now, are we taking those from fund balance, or are we taking those from the capital reserve fund?
Capital reserve, which is part of this restricted fund balance.
Okay.
So we're not increasing our debt level.
No.
Well, is there unrestricted fund balance sloshing around that we could use for these capital projects
Not if
instead?
we, not if we wanted to maintain our ratios.
Okay.
All right, so that would
Um,
be an amendment to each of the amendments 2, 3, and 4. And did you have specific language?
It would be to alter in each case where it says in the general fund to read capital reserve fund.
So first we build the fund up and then we spend it.
Well, funding has to come from someplace.
That's your motion?
Yep.
Second? Any other questions or comments on assigning those as the source? Yeah, exactly. All in favor?
Aye?
Aye. Okay.
Before moving too far, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that we have a similar amendment to Amendment 1 to describe that those funds will be coming from bonds. Yeah.
Oh, and to authorize borrowing?
Yeah.
So would we just add through issuance of bonds?
Yes.
Second? Okay, so that's, all in favor?
Aye?
Aye. Okay. So that closes out that part. Do you have, something else you want to get into, Bruce? That covers it?
So, let's see, I move that Alderman Payon's salary be part of.
I'll let Fred, come back here before we close out, endorse the report. Anything else we have? Sure, Alderman Finlayson.
Yeah, it's a general comment. At the last meeting, I raised the issue about the mayor's staff being given increased salaries. And what I've learned is that the mayor has the prerogative to place his employees on the scale wherever he'd like for them to be, as well as to promote them however he would like for them to be promoted. And so additional funding, whether well and above what everybody else gets, is the mayor's prerogative.
But it was also, wasn't it a movement into a new position?
I said promotion.
Well, but it wasn't a promotion, it was a change in job description.
Well,
right?
but a salary increase went along with that.
Well, because
That constitutes a promotion in my mind, maybe it doesn't.
I
Thank
thought
you for
your
looking into that.
information was very helpful.
Get myself one of those jobs in the mayor's office.
Yeah, yeah,
Pretty
that's
good
right.
over there. You can make all,
You have to wait a year.
make all kinds of,
Just wanted to clarify, thank you.
okay.
Okay. And did we finish our discussion about the notion of a couple of council work sessions to go over the budget? I mean, is everybody,
Yeah, I think it makes some sense. So we have, sure, Mr. City Manager.
Should, I think, ask the clerk to poll the members to see when they're available over the next 2 or 3 weeks.
yeah, I think we probably have to advertise it, so we probably need a couple of, and if we get it done in one, then we can have a party.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we need to technically have a motion to approve the report as amended.
As amended, I move that we approve the report as amended of the report from the Finance Committee to the council writ large.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good work,
Thank
everybody.
you, Mr. Chair, for a very orderly Finance Committee deliberation.
My pleasure.
I think we had a schedule, we followed the schedule, and got our job done. I appreciate your work.
Well, I appreciate that. So we're good.
I have it, I just don't have it.
I move that we adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.